What the book sets out to do? Book 1 opens with a single question, and the whole volume is an answer to it. How did a 3,000-year legacy of botanical reliance get erased in less than a century? The author frames the project as reclamation rather than advocacy. The argument beneath every chapter is that the ancient sages, physicians, and pharaohs who used cannabis sativa were not fumbling in superstition. They had arrived by patient trial at a plant unusually well suited to human physiology. The book's job is to recover what they knew, validate it against modern chemistry, and put it back into working hands. The structure follows 3 deliberate movements: the historical anchor, the biological machinery, and the conscious kitchen. History, botany, then practice. It is built to be read cover to cover or kept on a shelf and opened at need. Part 1. The Sacred Seed. The history begins where the human record of cannabis actually begins, on the high, cold steppes of Central Asia, in a sealed tent thick with funeral smoke. Chapter 1. The Smoke of the Steppes opens in the Altai Mountains at 1,600 meters in the permafrost of the Ulagan Valley, where the ground does not decay, it locks. What the cold preserved there is a record of nomadic pastoralists who used the plant 2 ways at once: rugged stalks for survival, resinous flowers for ecstatic funerary rite. That dual nature, fiber and sacrament, sets the pattern for everything that follows. From the Kurgans, the plant travels the trade routes into the river valleys of the Indian subcontinent. Char. 2. The Nectar of the Vedas, where it is written into the sacred bedrock as a liberator from anxiety and bound to the mythology of Shiva. Chapter 3 turns to Imperial China, where Taoist alchemists sought communion through its vapors. Chapter 4 follows the fire of the Magi into Persia. Chapter 5, The Anointing, is one of the book's sharpest set pieces. It reads the holy anointing oil of Exodus as what it plainly is: a recipe, with ingredients listed by name and by weight: flowing myrrh, sweet cinnamon, fragrant cassia, olive oil, and a substance the Hebrew calls cannabosum. Holiness in that vision is not a mood that descends, it is compounded, measured, and made. Chapters 6 and 7 carry the thread through the borrowed sacraments of the ancient Near East into the Daga cultures of southern Africa, a part that crosses most of the inhabited world without once leaving the documentary record. Where Part 1 traces ritual, Part 2 traces medicine, the transition from sacrament to codified clinical asset. Chapter 8. The Emperor's Ledger begins with Shenong, the divine farmer of Chinese tradition, who is said to have walked the ridgelines, tasting hundreds of wild herbs and roots on his own body to determine what healed and what poisoned. Those oral traditions were gathered under the Han into the Shenong Benkao Jing, one of the world's foundational codified pharmacopeias, and the first place cannabis is written down as medicine rather than rite. Chapter 9 examines the altar at Arad. Chapter 10, the classical Mediterranean. Chapter 11, the Arabic apothecary, covers the Islamic Golden Age, when pharmacologists in Baghdad and Cairo built an empirical bridge cataloging cannabis as a targeted treatment for epilepsy, chronic inflammation, and acute pain. Chapter 12, the Calcutta Experiments, is the hinge of the historical half. In 1833, a 24-year-old Irish physician and chemist named Dr. William Brooke O'Shaughnessy arrived in Calcutta as an assistant surgeon for the British East India Company, already known in Europe for his analysis of cholera victims' blood. His clinical trials stunned the Western medical establishment and triggered a Victorian apothecary boom, cannabis tinctures as household staples, endorsed by physicians as eminent as Sir J. Russell Reynolds, who advocated cannabis for menstrual pain in The Lancet in 1890 and manufactured at scale by the earliest pharmaceutical corporations. Then Chapter 13, The Great Erasure. The 20th century breaks the chain. The authors lay out a convergence of bureaucratic survival, geopolitical weaponization, and, he is careful to mark this as the more contested claim, corporate interest, which demonized the plant under the exoticized name marijuana. Anslinger's Gore Files, the Hearst Press, the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act hearings over the objection of the AMA's Dr. William Creighton Woodward, the 1961 UN Single Convention, and the 1970 Controlled Substances Act are treated as a documented sequence, not a conspiracy sketch. Source to congressional transcripts, treaty texts, and Mustow's 1972 review. The result was a half-century of silence that halted clinical validation outright. Part the third, The Alchemy of Cultivation. The book now turns from the archive to the plant. Chapter 14. The architecture of the trichome starts from evolutionary botany rather than human use. Cannabis did not build its molecular machinery for our convenience. It built it under multi-million-year pressure from insects, UV, and heat. And the governing fact is rooted immobility. A plant cannot flee, cannot shade itself, cannot burrow away, so it must solve everything chemically. Cannabinoids and terpenes are that solution. The chapter then develops the entourage effect, drawing on Ben Shabbat and McCullum's 1998 paper and Russo's 2011 meta-analysis of cannabinoid-terpenoid crosstalk. Chapter 15. The species question takes an axe to dispensary folk taxonomy. The indica sativa binary, the authors argue, is one of the most successful pieces of folk taxonomy ever devised, printed on millions of labels, believed by millions of people, and wrong in almost every particular that matters. The two familiar silhouettes are real. What they predict about effect is not. Chapters 16 through 19 move into practice, seed to seedling, the mindful soil, the living garden, and guarding it. The soil chapters lean on the soil food, mycorrhizal symbiosis, root exudation, and treat the rhizosphere as something the plant actively programs rather than passively occupies. Part 3 closes with a full living soil recipe for the raised fabric pot and a working guide to drying, trimming, and curing. Part 4, The Conscious Kitchen. The final movement is the one the subtitle promises, and it is explicitly a mathematical manual, an attempt to turn extraction from unpredictable craft into repeatable science. Chapter 20. The Chemistry of Fire covers decarboxylation, the time and temperature kinetics converting THCA, CBDA, and CBGA into their active neutral forms, and the CBN that forms under thermal stress. Chapter 21. The Potency Illusion may be the book's most useful chapter for a modern reader. It dismantles the THC percentage, the number that rules dispensary shelves and growers' business models, as part real chemistry, part measurement artifact, and part outright fraud, explaining why two labs return different answers for the same flower, and why the legal definition of hemp has become a chemical farce. Its foundation is the fact that the plant does not actually make the drug. Chapter 22, The Sacred Carriers, handles what happens after the flower surrenders its acid. Neutral cannabinoids are strongly hydrophobic and lipophilic, insoluble in water, powerfully soluble in fat, so the chapter works through lipid matrices, bioavailability, and the use of CBD as a negative allosteric modulator at CB1 to temper THC's impairment, anxiety, and tachycardia. Chapter 23 gives recipes from the apothecary table. Chapter 24 covers Rick Simpson oil with unusual candor about risk, unpredictable concentration in homemade preparations, delayed onset, and a firm start low, go slow protocol beginning at a grain of rice-sized dose. Chapter 25 closes with a photographic gallery following a single crop from seedling to resin-heavy harvest, shot by Cyril. The back matter. The closing sections give the book its human weight. Waterdog Herb Farm and Greenfield Ranch is Searles's account of building a 106-acre permaculture homestead in Redwood Valley from 2008 onward, organized around one question: are you going to take from the land or work with it? From the waiting room to the garden is Toller's own. Infusion chairs, blood counts recited like sports scores, and the move west when surviving had become a full-time job that didn't feel like living. Standing up for the medicine is the final word, and Toller gives it to patients rather than to himself. Reform came from people willing to say under their own names, while it was still illegal, that a plant had given them their lives back. The quoted line that anchors it: "I would rather be illegally alive than legally dead." The volume closes with notes, the psychedelic kitchen recipes, a bibliography, a technical glossary, and an index. The through-line Book 1 is built to work as two things at once: a documented history of how a medicine was erased, and a working manual for putting it back to use. It assumes no prior expertise but never talks down to a reader who already knows the plant, and its central claim is consistent from the frozen graves of the Altai to the oven timer. The most sophisticated pharmaceutical laboratory on Earth is still a mindful seed grown under an open sky.